The baby isn't his, it's my late husband's, and yes, we're adopting, I said calmly, watching Katherine Blackwood's perfectly manicured hand freeze midway to her pearls as the DNA results fluttered to her pristine marble floor. For 3 months, she'd publicly branded me a gold-digging whore who'd trapped her precious son. But now the truth would reveal something far more devastating than her worst assumptions. The real question wasn't whether they'd apologize. It was whether they'd survive learning who their son really was when he thought no one was looking. My name is Delaney, and I'm 29 years old. Standing in the Blackwoods mansion that December evening, watching their world shatter as elegantly as their Waterford crystal, I felt nothing like the vindication I'd expected. The grand foyer still smelled of pine and privilege, their Christmas party continuing in the next room while we held our own private apocalypse among the coats and judgment. "That's impossible," Richard Blackwood Sr. finally managed, his senator's voice cracking. "You said you were pregnant. Our son's child. You moved into our guest house." "I said I was pregnant," I corrected. "You assumed the rest. Just like you assumed I was after your money. Just like you assumed I trapped him. Just like you assumed so many things that made you feel comfortable in your cruelty." The story they thought they knew was simple. Fortune-hunting nobody seduces their medical student son, gets pregnant, secures the bag. The son they'd raised to be perfect, who was months from his residency at Johns Hopkins, who'd brought home the wrong kind of girl, and paid the price. The truth was an avalanche they never saw coming. "Let me start from the beginning," I said, settling into their Italian leather armchair without invitation. "Though not the beginning you think you know. 8 months ago, I buried my husband. 5 years of marriage to James ended not in divorce, but in a drunk driver's split-second decision. I was 28, widowed, and discovering that grief was a living thing that ate you from the inside out. The support group met in a church basement that smelled like old coffee and fresh pain. That's where I met Richard Jr. He was grieving too, not a spouse but his self-image. A DUI had cost him his first residency placement. His parents didn't know. He'd crafted an elaborate lie about deferring for research, and every Tuesday he sat in that circle and performed remorse like a trained seal. "My son has never had a DUI, Katherine hissed. "You're lying." "March 15th, I interrupted. "Check the Suffolk County records. Sealed, of course. Amazing what money can do." But he had to attend meetings as part of his plea deal. 30 sessions. I was there for every one. We'd bonded over loss, his manufactured, mine devastating. He was handsome, charming, from the kind of family that had portraits in museums. He said the right things, held me when I cried, made me feel less alone in my darkness. When he suggested coffee, then dinner, then more, I thought maybe I could survive after all. "The pregnancy was a shock," I continued. "James and I had been trying for 3 years. The doctors said it was unlikely. Then, 2 months after he died, I realized I was carrying his child. Our miracle, just too late." Richard Sr.'s face had gone from red to ash. "But you and our son started dating when I was 3 months pregnant." I told him immediately. Showed him the ultrasound with the date. Explained everything. He said. I paused, remembering. He said it was perfect. That his parents would never accept me, young widow, middle-class teacher. But a baby? A baby would force your hand. No. Catherine's whisper was barely audible. Richard would never. Use a dead man's child as a prop? Lie to his parents? Manipulate everyone around him? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to saved messages. Would you like to read the texts where he coached me on what to say? Where he calculated exactly when to introduce me, so the math would seem right. Where he said, and I quote, "My mother's so desperate for grandchildren, she'll forget to be a snob?" The silence that followed had weight, like the air before a storm. He was at the ultrasound when we found out it was a girl, I continued. He held my hand while I cried because James would never meet her. Then he took me to lunch and explained how we'd announce it at the family Christmas party. Maximum impact, he said. Your friends, your colleagues, all witnessing the moment you'd have to accept me or look like monsters. Stop. Richard Sr. held up a hand. Even if this is true, why would you go along with it? I laughed, but it was bitter. Because I was drowning in grief, and he threw me a rope. Because he made me believe he loved me. Because when you're pregnant and alone and broken, you make terrible decisions. And because I didn't know what he really was. Not yet. Which was? Catherine's voice could have frozen fire. An opportunist. A liar. A man who saw my vulnerability and crafted it into a ladder to climb back into your good graces. I met her eyes. You created him, you know. This person who would use a widow's baby as a bargaining chip. This is what happens when you raise a child to believe image matters more than integrity. How dare you? I dare because I've spent 3 months being called a whore in rooms I wasn't even in. Because you told everyone at the club I was trash who trapped your son. Because you made my pregnancy about your prejudice instead of my loss. Because you never, not once, asked me about the father of this baby or why I was so sad under the smiles your son coached me to wear. I pulled out a folder, spreading papers across their coffee table. Text messages. Emails. The real timeline. Proof that he knew from day one this wasn't his child. Proof that he orchestrated every moment to manipulate you into accepting me because he needed redemption after the DUI nearly cost him everything. But the test? Katherine grabbed at the DNA results. If you knew all this, why take a paternity test? Because 2 weeks ago, your son ended things. Apparently, Johns Hopkins called. His spot opened back up. Suddenly, he didn't need the reformed bad boy with a ready-made family narrative. He needed to be single, focused, unburdened. I watched understanding dawn on their faces. He told me to handle it. To tell you I'd miscarried. To disappear quietly, so he could return to being your golden boy. Richard would never. Katherine started again, but her voice lacked conviction. The same Richard who's been telling you I refused to take a paternity test? Who's been playing devastated victim while painting me as the villain? Check his phone. I guarantee he's already spinning this to his advantage somehow. Richard Sr. sank onto their velvet sofa. The adoption papers. You mentioned adoption. James's parents, I said softly. They're in their 70s. They want to be part of their granddaughter's life, but can't raise her. We're doing a formal adoption to ensure everything's legal clean. They'll be grandparents. I'll be her mother. And your son will be what he always was, a footnote in a story that was never about him. This will destroy him, Katherine whispered. His reputation. No, I stood gathering my papers. You'll protect him. You always have. You'll spin this somehow. The poor boy deceived by a grieving widow. The victim of a woman's manipulation. You'll find a way because that's what you do. But you'll do it without me as your villain. I moved toward the door, then paused. You want to know the saddest part? I actually started to love him. I thought maybe we could build something real on a foundation of shared pain. But you can't build on lies, and everything about your son is a performance. Even his grief was costume jewelry, shiny enough to fool someone actually drowning in the real thing. Wait, Richard Sr. called. The guest house. Your things. Already moved. Did it while you were at the club this morning spreading the latest version of my gold-digging saga. I turned back one last time. I'm naming her Emma, after James's grandmother. She'll grow up knowing she was wanted, planned for, loved by the man who didn't live to hold her. She'll know her story, all of it, including the chapter where her mother was so lost in grief, she almost let a manipulative man use her existence as currency. What do you want? Katherine asked desperately. Money? An apology. I want you to know that your son is exactly who you raised him to be. Someone who sees people as props, relationships as transactions, and love as leverage. I want you to sit with that knowledge every time you defend him, every time you enable him, every time you pretend he's the victim in someone else's story. I left them there, in their museum of a home, surrounded by portraits of stern ancestors who'd probably been just as cruel, just as blind to their children's manipulations. Outside, snow was falling on their circular drive. My beat-up Honda looked wonderfully out of place among the luxury cars. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with texts from Richard Jr. playing damage control, no doubt. I deleted them unread. 30 minutes later, I parked outside a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood. James's parents, Diana and Robert, met me at the door. Diana's hands went immediately to my belly. How did it go? She asked gently. About as expected. They know the truth now. What they do with it. I shrugged. Robert hugged me tight. You did the right thing. James would be proud of you for protecting Emma. James would have punched Richard Jr. in his manipulative face. I laughed, tears starting. That too, Diana agreed. Come on. I made soup, and we need to talk nursery colors. I followed them inside, into a house filled with pictures of James, with love that didn't come with conditions, with people who saw me as a person, not a problem to solve or a scandal to manage. My phone rang. Katherine Blackwood. I sent it to voicemail. Later, as Diana and I looked through James's baby photos, she asked quietly, Do you regret any of it? I thought about the question. The grief that led me to that support group. The loneliness that made me vulnerable to Richard's performance. The 3 months of letting his family vilify me because I was too broken to fight back. I regret trusting the wrong person with my pain, I said finally. But I don't regret the outcome. Emma will have us. All of us. And she'll never have to wonder if she's loved for who she is or what she represents. The Blackwoods? Robert asked. Will they trouble you? They'll try to control the narrative. Make Richard the victim. But I have the truth, and more importantly, I have nothing they can take. They thought I wanted their money, their name, their acceptance. They never understood I just wanted to not feel alone while growing the last piece of James the First had left. We spent the evening planning, laughing, crying a little. The family I'd chosen versus the one that had chosen to see me as an enemy. No apologies came from the Blackwoods that night. Or the next. Or ever. But a month later, when Emma arrived 2 weeks early, perfect and screaming and absolutely James's daughter, I understood that some stories don't need apologies as endings. They need beginnings instead. And ours, Emma's and mine and her grandparents', was worth more than all the Blackwood money and manipulations combined. The birth announcement I sent was simple. Emma Grace Sullivan, born to loving parents Delaney and the late James Sullivan, welcomed by grandparents Diana and Robert Sullivan. No mention of the Blackwoods. No mention of Richard Jr., no mention of the months I'd spent being called a gold digger while grieving my husband and carrying his child. Just the truth, clean and simple as new snow. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving you were never theirs to judge in the first place.